is cooking.
To be the man, you have to be the man.
Big Papa Pump, it's your hookup.
Flawless.
Holler, MDMA. Rest in peace. Raw is Jericho.
What you gonna do when Hulkamania destroys you?
I am the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be.
What?
Yes! Yes!
Woo!
Yes!
Woo! What?
Yes!
Woo, woo, woo! Woo! What?
Woo!
What?
For the benefit of those with flash photography.
Would you please shut the hell up? If you're not down with that, we got 2 words for ya!
Oh, yes!
What's up?
Excuse me!
It's true.
Hello. Ooh, yeah!
Hey, yo.
I'm awesome! Yeah!
And I quote,
That was what was best for business. We, the people,
Believe in the shield.
follow the buzzers.
I'm the best in the world.
The kid you dig that sucker! And that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so. Have a nice day!
You're welcome.
We're going to talk about wrestling. We're going to quickly try and get through Hell in a Cell. I'm going to be honest, one of those largely throwaway pay-per-views. They had a few matches advertised. The rest were kind of thrown together at the last minute. If you're talking about thrown together at the last minute, Randy Orton beat Ali after they had a little backstage altercation on the pre-show. But largely a forgettable show. You had Braun Strowman and the Viking Raiders defeat the OC via disqualification. Chad Gable beat King Corbin, which makes zero sense if you're trying to get Baron Corbin over. We also saw Charlotte beat Bayley to become the new SmackDown Women's Champion, which, in light of the draft coming this week, that could be a huge deal. We do have the Kabuki Warriors beat Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross. The Kabuki Warriors actually turned heel at the same time. And to be honest, they're better as heels. I think Asuka and Kairi Sane, whilst they're both really good as baby faces, they are better as the foreign invader type tag team. And if you haven't seen it, Asuka took part in an intergender match a few years ago with her trainer, and he beats her like she owes him money. It is incredible to watch. Certainly something that would fly in the face of what they want from intergender matches nowadays. We then had Roman Reigns and Daniel Bryan beat Eric Rowan and Luke Harper. This is the one where we expected to see Daniel Bryan turn his back on Roman Reigns, but in reality, I think they actually have turned Daniel Bryan into a proper face because he was doing the yes chants at the end of the match, and everybody has to love the yes chants. We opened the show, and we've done this kind of out of order, but just talking about the stuff that's the most important, really. We had Becky Lynch beat Sasha Banks in a Hell in a Cell match. A lot of people online saying that Sasha Banks was being buried in this match because she lost, but in reality, she came out of the match looking like a star. Becky Lynch came out of the match looking like a star. And now we talk about the main event. The main event of the show was, of course, The Fiend versus Seth Rollins. And I'm going to be honest, it was a great match in the sense that it was quite brutal. There was quite a lot of spots in there that were really entertaining to watch. And it did show the demise of the Seth Rollins character in the sense that The Fiend doesn't have to win or lose that match. What The Fiend wants is to push the dark side of Seth Rollins, and in turn, that actually becomes the victory that The Fiend wanted all along. But what we got instead was about 400 curb stomps, which is Seth Rollins' finishing move right now, and the referee stopped the fight. which it's a Hell in a Cell. You don't stop a Hell in a Cell. You go until somebody gets pinned. That's kind of the rule. But the fans in the audience thought it was a DQ finish, not something else. And that is the part that has got a lot of bad publicity this week and has actually resulted in an episode of Raw that didn't have the Undisputed Champion and didn't really have Bray Wyatt on it as well. But if you're wondering, Martin, why didn't you do SmackDown first? Well, the reason there is I wanted to get the pay-per-view out the way because the pay-per-view kind of leads into what we do first, which is Raw. But I'm going to have to start swapping it around because technically SmackDown's on the Friday, Raw's on the Monday. So for the first time, we're actually going to do SmackDown after the next song, and then we're going to do Raw. It just feels weird doing it the other way around. Do you know what? Probably better if I did my show on a different day. But Wednesdays is Headlocks and Headphones Day. If you want to get in contact, Headlocks and Headphones on Facebook. And we have headlocksandheadphones@gmail.com if you want to get in contact there. We also have the YouTube channel, which is putting up the shows every week, minus the music, because YouTube don't like us to use music. That way you can have a listen no matter where you are, and you can have some fun. And you can hopefully find something you disagree with and actually start an argument with me, because I love arguments. We are here to talk about wrestling, and we are here to discuss the idea that on Fox on Friday, what we had was the debut of the brand new SmackDown on Fox show, which was pretty stacked to the point where they'd advertised Stone Cold, The Undertaker, and various other people as being part of the show, and they weren't used, which means that they either overran with other stuff, which would be very unprofessional and not unheard of. It is wrestling, and people can go a little bit crazy when they're out in the ring and do things for themselves. But what we did get on the SmackDown show was actually still a really good show. So when you open up a show like this, what you want to do for a brand new audience, and let's face it, Fox, which is a legitimate sports network that they're moving on to, they wanted to establish something very well. So they put out King Corbin first, which looks cheap and tacky, I'm going to be honest. The outfit he's wearing looks cheap and tacky. But they immediately put Becky Lynch out there as well. So what we had was a little small confrontation between the two, immediately followed by The Rock coming out. And The Rock asks Becky Lynch, the man's permission, if he can have a go at Baron Corbin. It's very entertaining to watch. If you haven't seen it, we will try and get that clip and pop it up on the Facebook page because it's very, very funny. There is a chant in there that we probably can't say on the air. However, I can put it up on Facebook. But The Rock has a proper go at Baron Corbin, and then The Rock and the man beat up Baron Corbin to send the fans home happy after the first segment of the show. Not that everybody's leaving yet, because we did have Becky and Charlotte beat Sasha and Bayley with the figure eight submission on Bayley by Charlotte, kind of giving us the hint that Charlotte could beat Bayley when we got to the pay-per-view on Sunday, which she ended up doing. We then had the latest episode of Firefly Funhouse interrupt Seth Rollins versus Shinsuke Nakamura, which looked like it was going to be an absolutely great first match to have on Fox. But we did have The Fiend then appear behind Seth after the Firefly Funhouse, which saw the death of Rambling Rabbit. If you don't know what Rambling Rabbit is, it's not what you immediately jump to when you think of the word rabbit. It is a puppet that is in the puppet. A puppet, which is in the show that Bray Wyatt does. Or perhaps no more. After Bray Wyatt's character tried to show what would happen to Seth Rollins in the cell on Sunday. We then went to the Kevin Owens versus Shane McMahon loser gets fired ladder match, and Kevin Owens won and immediately fired Shane McMahon and gave him a Stone Cold Stunner. The problem is that Kevin Owens has been the one moved to the alumni page, and Shane McMahon has stayed on the SmackDown roster, according to WWE.com, suggesting perhaps that it may actually not have been the intended finish leading into the match, and the internet team haven't been told of the change, And as a result, they've done the wrong change. But we'll see. Maybe there's a storyline coming here for why Kevin Owens was moved away from the SmackDown roster. We then had Strowman, Miz, and Heavy Machinery beat Ziggler, Rude, Styles, and Orton. Tyson Fury was at ringside, and Braun Strowman threw Dolph Ziggler into the ringside barrier where Tyson Fury was, and that angered Tyson Fury, and it led to an altercation between him and Braun Strowman. If you don't know who Tyson Fury is the heavyweight champion of the world in boxing, and he's English, and he's a gypsy. Now, the gypsy part doesn't seem like something I would normally say, but his name is the Gypsy King. He is somebody who has had mental health issues, stepped away from boxing, and came back. He is definitely a character. He's definitely somebody that's kind of interesting when it comes to the brand of wrestling, because he's somebody who could actually do quite a lot, because he's used to winding people up. He's used to having some fun with things. But we did have... immediately after that, Roman Reigns defeated Rowan by pinfall after a big knee from Bryan during what was a lumberjack match. We then had Brock Lesnar versus Kofi Kingston, and let's be honest, we could literally watch the whole match right now because it lasted 9 seconds. Everybody was raging that it didn't last longer. But I think in many ways it protects Kofi Kingston, because it's one of those shock and awe wins where Kofi can walk away and go, do you know what? If I get a rematch, I have a chance of beating him, because that won't happen again. What we did have, though, was Brock Lesnar celebrating and Rey Mysterio's music plays. This is important because Rey Mysterio and his son Dominic were attacked last week on Raw. And Dominic got taken to hospital, and we ended up seeing that really cool moment where Rey took his mask off, but we couldn't quite make out his face because of the ambulance door. But Rey Mysterio is injured, and he wasn't alone. He came with Cain Velasquez. If you don't know that name, he is the UFC former World Heavyweight Champion, and he is the one man, allegedly, that Brock Lesnar is scared of. Because Cain Velasquez is the man who beat Brock Lesnar when Brock Lesnar held the World Championship in UFC. So the interesting point here is we have this little kind of crossover between UFC and boxing and the WWE. I think in no small part this is going to be down to the involvement of Fox and the fact that they want to have some legitimate stars in there to get some interest in the show. But leading into Raw, they announced that Tyson Fury was going to be there. And does anything happen between Tyson Fury and Braun Strowman? You're going to have to wait for one more song to find out. So, we go into Raw, and we have quite a lot of things that are still up in the air in terms of the Tyson Fury situation. Would we see Brock Lesnar this week? Chances are no. And we actually have the draft coming up on Friday, which is going to be huge because it means we actually are going to have distinct brands of Raw and SmackDown again. But there's a difference for this draft, because instead of the draft being done by a general manager, like it has been in the past, a Ric Flair, an Eric Bischoff, a Vince McMahon, or William Regal, or instead of it being done randomly, like they did a few years ago, which is the year when Jim Ross got drafted to SmackDown, and he hadn't been told. He only found out when it happened on air, and apparently he wasn't very happy because he basically swore live on air because he didn't want to move to SmackDown. He saw that as the B show. It was a demotion. And now we're in this world where wrestling's kind of flipped on its head. SmackDown is the A show because it is the one that's getting WWE billions of dollars just from its deal in America. And as a result of that deal and the association with Fox, they have got Tyson Fury, they've got Cain Velasquez, and they actually have, apparently, Eminem and several other people coming in over the next little while, which should make things a lot more interesting for wrestling fans, although it will just lead to AEW fans telling us that it's all done to counter-program against the AEW brand. But that's an argument for another day. We won't go into that just now. So, Raw, one of those shows where going into it, I wasn't actually as excited as I thought I probably should have been, because I felt there was more that could have been done on the SmackDown on Friday. And just now, although technically we have the roster draft, it is kind of like a continuation. So everything that happens on SmackDown leads into something that happens on Raw because of this godforsaken wildcard rule. But I'm going to be honest, the one thing that I actually have kind of got a kick out of on Raw is this Rusev angle. And it opened the show. We actually had Rusev in the ring getting his butt kicked by Randy Orton and Baron Corbin. And the intriguing thing here was that what we saw was Rusev getting his butt kicked until he was able to kind of gain an advantage again. When he did, that's when Bobby Lashley's face appeared on the big screen. And when Bobby Lashley's face appeared on the big screen, it was obvious that he was wearing a bathrobe. And one of the interesting things here is he wasn't just wearing a bathrobe, he was wearing Rusev's bathrobe. And that meant that it was clear that Bobby Lashley was in Rusev's house. We then saw Bobby Lashley jump into Rusev's bed, and he is joined by Lana, who strips off her bra underneath the blanket. It's still technically PG, come on. And we see Rusev get very angry, and he proceeds to beat up Randy Orton and Baron Corbin. I like where this is going because, do you know what? Everybody's saying the story's stupid. I say everybody, but there's a lot of people saying the story's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. Why would they do it? But here's the thing. We've just seen a very similar storyline with Mike Kanellis and Maria Kanellis. So there is... It's not the first time it's been done. It's been done very recently. The issue is that I think it's going to turn into something a lot bigger. We're going to get to see a more serious side of Rusev, and he's already part of Team Hogan for that match at Crown Jewel, which we're going to talk about in the next couple of weeks as they start adding people to the teams, which I don't think is going to happen till after the draft, because storyline-wise, the draft is basically the next 2 episodes of Raw and SmackDown. But we go straight into the first match, which is the Viking Raiders, and they defeated Dolph Ziggler and Robert Roode in a non-title match. Later on, they did a promo basically saying that next week they are going to get the tag titles next week, which is interesting because it's not something that I've actually seen a lot of, is the Viking Raiders actually in title matches. I've seen them having matches in NXT, but it's usually been just kind of throwaway matches. So it'd be good to see how they do in a situation where they are important. We had Aleister Black cut his now infamous promos in a cupboard. Think back to the BBC's children's TV shows, and you'll get the idea of exactly what's happening. He's in a cupboard, and he's talking about how nobody wants to face him, and nobody is going to accept a fight from him. Very, very similar to the idea they're actually using with the Authors of Pain just now, which is that they're such good fighters, nobody wants to face them. The interesting thing there is that later on in the show, 2 people did come out and actually accept, which was the Singh brothers, who are now... They look like the Young Bucks from AEW. They just look silly. And it's quite interesting that Aleister Black beat them both in just a couple of minutes. And he's got a brand new submission hold, which is almost like a reverse sleeper, but he puts his other hand behind his back. Difficult to describe. Very cool looking move. The OC faced off against the Lucha House Party in a match that was much more competitive than it probably should have been. And I was very impressed because... AJ Styles, I think it's clear the OC being put back together to protect him because as he gets older, his body's not quite holding up as much as it used to, and you don't want to have somebody like that struggling. But the OC did beat the Lucha House Party, and it led into Miz TV. The Kabuki Warriors interrupted Becky Lynch and Charlotte, who were starting to get a little confrontational, and the Kabuki Warriors, Asuka and Kairi Sane, cut a promo in Japanese, which my producer tells me was basically telling the 2 girls in the ring that they were not very nice people. They're actually a B word that ends with an H. So hopefully you can put the 2 together there. We then, for some random reason, had the Street Profits cutting a promo talking about the draft. And what they did was they put over Apollo Crews and how good he is in the ring. They talked about Buddy Murphy being the wrestling's best kept secret. There's only so long you can be the best kept secret before you start to just be an underachiever. And then they talked about Drake Maverick, who they labelled as Steve Carell, as the 40-year-old virgin. But that did lead into Ricochet versus Apollo Crews. This was a draft showcase match. So this was just to show what some of the guys who could be drafted between brands are actually capable of. And we lead into the main event. Tyson Fury came out and asked for an apology from Braun Strowman. He did say that he crossed the line when he jumped over the barrier on SmackDown on Friday because he shouldn't have even done that. But he does have permission to be here on Raw, and he does want an apology from Braun Strowman. Braun Strowman comes out, basically says all the usual catchphrases. You're going to get these hands, etc., etc. You're going to get these hands to a world heavyweight boxer who could knock you out with one punch. It's a very, very brave man that does that, I'm going to be honest. But it did end up with a massive brawl to end the show. As the brawl kind of broke up, you had Braun Strowman go backstage, and he was interviewed in what's called the gorilla position by one of the generic female interviewers that they have right now. And Braun Strowman basically said that, anytime, any place. But then he proceeded to just run down the ramp and try to start the fight anyway. It looked very good. There was a part where Tyson Fury demonstrated how much he actually understands wrestling, because he actually stood up on the first rope whilst he's being held back by people and shouted out his nickname, which I'm going to try and do now without breaking the microphone. Are you ready? The Gypsy King! Yes, he's proud to be a gypsy, which, there's nothing wrong with that. But it is going to get a reaction in America. The one thing that's quite interesting is we didn't have The Fiend. We didn't have Seth Rollins on the show. We did have a little video hyping up everything that happened over the weekend at Hell in a Cell. But this is the part that's quite interesting, because WWE obviously don't want this to be mentioned, but they've unofficially announced the rematch of this match at Survivor Series. By putting it up on Twitter, they then pulled it almost instantly. I think they want to leave announcing that until after the Crown Jewel pay-per-view, because the Crown Jewel pay-per-view is kind of going to be the last show where we have everybody together and we're kind of still working things out. Normally after a draft, you have a week or two where somebody who's been drafted to Raw may appear on SmackDown, particularly if they're the SmackDown Women's Champion, for example. If Charlotte was drafted to Raw and she was still the champion, she would still have to show up to defend her belt, so that could create quite an interesting situation at Crown Jewel, particularly if Sasha Banks were drafted to SmackDown and she was still in the same building and able to interfere in Becky Lynch's matches. But this is the section now where we are going to head into talking about NXT and AEW. This is kind of like where me and the producer are going to face off, because I really enjoyed NXT this week. I have watched AEW. I won't be watching it every week. That'll be the producer's job. But the producer has also enjoyed the vast majority of AEW as well. What this means is great times for wrestling fans, because regardless of what wrestling you like, there's something for you out there. And I'm going to talk about the NWA show right now, because I'm not going to get much of a chance to talk about it later on after we start doing NXT and AEW. The NWA Power Show, and it has 3 R's when you look at the logo. We've put the link for it up on Headlocks and Headphones. It debuts every Tuesday, 6:05 Eastern Standard Time. Because we're here in the UK, I've done the work for you. That's 11:05 p.m. on a Tuesday night. You can watch 1 hour of NWA wrestling, and it's done studio style, which means there's no music, there's no pyro. It's just people out there performing together, trying to get the crowd on their side. And do you know what? The crowd could not have been more excited this week. If you haven't seen this episode, I have actually uploaded it onto the Facebook page, Headlocks and Headphones. You will really enjoy it. We open up with a promo from Nick Aldis, where he hypes up the fact that he's NWA champion, and he has a girl by his side who I believe is Braun Strowman's partner in real life. And Nick Aldis is the NWA champion, and he has faced off against guys like Cody Rhodes from AEW and Tim Storm, who was the person he originally beat for that belt. He is getting his last chance at the belt on this first show. I'm not going to give you spoilers, because I actually encourage you to go and check this. We also had the Dawsons, a tag team that the NWA are pushing really heavily. We had Eli Drake, who was in the Rock's TV show Ballers, who was a very, very good talent in Impact Wrestling. He can cut a great promo, but he's also very good in the ring. We had James Storm actually brawling all over the studio with somebody. And we then led into the main event, which was Nick Aldis versus Tony Storm. And Nick Aldis did end up hitting his valet during the match by mistake. There's an interesting angle there. I'll let you watch and see what happens after the match. But what's cool is, back in the NWA, after a match, the wrestlers wouldn't just leave. Because they were on live television, the wrestlers would actually walk in front of shot whilst the on-camera stuff was being done by the announcers. So Billy Corgan, the lead singer of the Smashing Pumpkins, has decided to embrace that. And instead of actually cutting away all the time and heavily editing things, he's actually having people come over and do interviews and stuff with the announcers. David Marquez, who's from Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, is actually doing some of the on-camera interviews with wrestlers. But the actual announcer, who commentates alongside Jim Cornette, he's doing some of them as well. It's a very good setup. It's very interesting. And there's also the cheesiest wrestling advert you'll ever see in your life hidden in there as well. Austin Idol has a wrestling school, and he tries to do a very, what's the word for it? Like a small local independent TV station style advert for his wrestling school. It is hilarious. Go and check it out. 6:05 every Tuesday, 11:05 UK time. The links, I'm going to put them up every week because I think this stuff is going to be great. There is some great wrestlers hidden away in the NWA right now, and we haven't even featured the women's title on their show yet. We haven't even had a title match for James Storm. It is only going to get better as they are able to expand on what they have.